Hi, I'm Bob Acton, the host of Color and Ceramics. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited about having you here today because I'm sharing an interview I did with Sandy Brown. She is a renowned British ceramic artist, really celebrated for her expressive, spontaneous approach to clay. Her work is characterized by bold colors, free flowing brushwork, and an energetic, intuitive style that challenges conventional ceramic traditions. After being introduced to ceramics in Japan, Sandy learned that pots can be dynamic, exciting, free, and irregular. She has since built an international reputation creating large scale installations, sculptural ceramics, and functional pottery that exude a sense of freedom and joy. With a career spanning decades, Sandy continues to push boundaries, inspiring both artists and collectors with her dynamic, uninhibited approach to ceramics. I hope you enjoy the show. Sandy, thanks so much for joining me today on the Color and Ceramics podcast. I am super excited about having you here on board with us, and I think our audience will love the conversation that we have because if anybody I know out there who is into color and ceramics, it's you. You have got a beautiful style that I have loved for years around your freedom with your color and your surface design. So welcome aboard.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you for saying all of that. Yeah, I really like it. Yeah, yeah, thank you.
You're most welcome. I know you do a variety of kinds of work. You paint and you do pottery, which I'd say is the sort of more functional kind of work. And you certainly do lots of sculptures, and we'll talk about all of those kind of things. And you've got a course that you run on creativity. So you've got your finger in the art scene in the UK. In a very important way and have been doing this work for a number of years. I know that this um, expertise that you've got has not just occurred overnight. This has been a journey for you of getting to where you are today, to be one of the UK's top, maybe the world's one of the world's top potters and sculptors. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to here today?
Wow, gosh, that's so. Thank you for saying all of that. Well, I didn't come across ceramics or art or anything as a child or a teenager. And I left, I was, a bit disillusioned and lost. And I left England looking for something. And to cut a long story short, I thought I was going to Australia, but I ended up in Japan. And um, I lived in Japan for 5 years, and that's where I got started in pottery because I kept coming across it. You can't not, if you live in Japan and somebody gives you a cup of tea, they'll tell you who made the cup and who the potter was and something about them. Um, and that happened a lot. And if I was having a meal somewhere, they would tell me all about the ceramics that was the meals were presented on, studio potters. And I just thought this was a huge enhancement to the whole dining experience. And so gradually I got drawn into it. I kept meeting potters. And then one day somebody said, "Do you want to have a go at the wheel?" And I just sort of touched the clay, and that was it. I was hooked, really. The sensuality of the soft clay and the sense of touch was really activated. And yeah, that's what hooked me.
That's a that's a very common story I hear about people who get hooked on clay the moment they touch it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now,
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
so you had that experience in Japan, and did you continue to do or start to do some training while you were over there?
Well, yes, because I was living in Tokyo initially, earning money by teaching English, and then when I and I visited some friends took me to visit Mashiko. I was often taken to visit Mashiko, which is Mashiko is a well then this is a long time ago, of course, and now it's even busier. But then it was a village of about 1,000 potters. Imagine if all the potters in the UK we're in one place. That's what Mexico's like, and it's full of life, and it's really interesting, exciting experience. And I was, the friends that took me there knew some of the potters, and I was being invited into their homes and being shown around, and I just thought it was a wonderful thing to be part of. There was as much being part of that community and that world as it was being in contact with the clay. It was the whole thing. Um, yes. So I ended up. I wanted to, find somewhere to work in Mexico, and a friend of mine found me one of the 5 or 6 old traditional family potteries that had been there for several generations, and they let me work there, and luckily it was one of the best places I could have worked, because they didn't have a sort of set thing about you've got to do it this way or you've got to do it that way like some of the others did. They, they had about 3 or 4 people working there who were various brothers-in-law and uncles and nephews and people who basically did what they wanted to fill up this massive, great wood-fired kiln. And so, as long as people made stuff to put in the kiln, they didn't really mind too much about what they made. And so it was a very free place, the best place for me to be, because I could gradually discover, and they were very free in their use of colored glazes. I mean, Mexico has got traditionally about 5 or 6 traditional glazes made out of the local rocks and stone and earth, and rice husk ash glaze is another one. And there's a lovely and that gives a creamy white. And there's a greeny ash glaze, and there's a brown, and the khaki, which is quite famous. This reddy brown glaze, which is made from a local rock called khaki. And so the pottery where I worked was very creative in the way and expressive in the way they used these glazes on top of each other and around each other, using ladles to pour one glaze on top of another, and slip trailers, which is called by the Japanese word of spoito, which the glaze gets spat out onto the. I always like that word. Yeah, so that was my introduction into pottery, was basically being free and playing, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Very cool. And your work really exemplifies that notion of play. And I think, when I look, as I was telling you before we started this recording, I have been following you for years. And I remember seeing a bowl of yours that had blue and all sorts of colors on it. And I thought, wow, that is total freedom to be able to apply the colors to your work in that kind of way. So your work really exemplifies that notion of play.
Oh, good. I'm glad it does. I'm glad it does. Thank you.
So you stayed in Japan for a few years. You trained with those folks, and then tell us you're back in the UK now. So tell us about your journey after Japan.
Well, then, while I was in Japan, I met Takeshi Yasuda, who is, a well-established potter. He's in China now,
Hmm.
and he wanted to come to the UK. He had, coincidentally, a couple of years before me, he had worked in the same pottery and had set up on his own. So he knew the family, and he had his own way of working. He wanted to come to the UK, so we got together and we came back to England together, and set up, and we were together for about 20 years. And he was a great sort of, I mean, his technical knowledge was superb. And also, he was a great confidence builder, because I would have found it quite challenging to sort of find my voice in this environment. I didn't know anything at all about British pottery. I didn't know anything at all about the materials that you find here. It was different clay, different glaze materials. I wouldn't have known how to get started. But luckily, being with him, he was a great sort of confidence builder, and helped me to believe in myself when I was doing what I thought was just messing about initially. And he said, "No, that's where your spirit is. That's the thing to value." And so it was great to have that sort of really valuable encouragement from somebody who I respected enormously. And it was also quite lucky in a way that I discovered color. At that time, nobody, no potter in the UK was using color. There was this belief, partly inspired by Bernard Leach, that pottery should be sort of brown, and um, and so a lot of it was, and because of what I'd seen in Japan, even although there was no color as such in the Mashiko glazes, they were all creamy browns and blacks. It did seem colorful somehow. And when I came back here, I started using the oxides that I knew would give color, like cobalt. I knew about cobalt that would give blue, and I knew that copper oxide would green. And so for a few months or a year, I was quite happy just to use those and to use manganese oxide as well. And then one day, I happened to see a catalogue for some earthenware colors that were made in a factory in Stoke-on-Trent, which is where all the mass-produced sort of china in the UK is made. And they were using colours. And I thought, well, why can't I use some colours? And I phoned up the supplier and I was told, oh no, these are no good for stoneware. You're working in stoneware. These colours won't last at stoneware. They'll burn out. They're earthenware colours. And so, well, I said, let me try them anyway. So I got a few samples sent to me, and surprisingly, not all of them did burn out. Most of them did, but I remember there was one purple colour that still remained purple at stoneware temperatures, and there were a couple of others. And then, and this is where I was really lucky actually. I was because um, uh, the potter suppliers that I was approaching knew I was looking for colours. They were given, they were the first people in the UK to be given some colours made by a company in Italy that was experimenting with stoneware colours. And they wanted some feedback from these suppliers in the UK as to how the colours worked here. And so I got them first. They passed them on to me. You're looking for colours, have a go. So I was able to try these colours, which are, pinks and peachy colours. And I used them enormously. I used them a huge amount, and sort of became known for them because I got them first. I got a lot of, they became associated with me, and so that was a stroke of luck, really. And with the blues and the greens, the pinks and peach then sort of widened the palette enormously. So I had the sort of full range of colours, and I still use them today. And I still, yeah. So that was incredibly lucky, really.
Yeah, that is very interesting. It's interesting to me on a couple of fronts. One is that I think really it speaks to how your spirit guided you along the way, right? I mean, as he had
Mm.
said, that's your spirit, and you were connected to the color, and then the maybe the energy of the universe found you as a result of that.
It was amazing. Yes, it was amazing. Yes.
Now, those colors that you're using today, are they stains or are you continuing to use oxides or can you
I
tell
use
me on
both.
that?
Both. I mean, the thing about the oxides is that they have character. Cobalt oxide has got a wide range of characters. It can be, really rich, inky blue when it's very, very strong, and it can be almost sort of pale, watery sea color when it's lighter. Um, and copper oxide has got a lovely sort of quality to it where it looks very deep when you look at the color when it's mixed with the transparent glaze, because I have a basically one transparent glaze, and I add all my coloring oxides into or coloring materials into that. So that makes about 7 or 8 colored glazes then. And the copper oxide, and also I've got another one, copper carbonate, slightly different green, but they have an enormous depth to the green. And I also use the commercial stains that, what I got from Italy, which are now being made in many places now, the sort of pinks and peaches, they are commercial stains. and they provide the color, but they don't have quite the same amount of character as the natural oxides do. So it works really well to have them in combination with each other. It sort of makes it like more widely interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, the stains are a bit more predictable, and the oxides have a bit more of a life on their own, don't they?
Absolutely, yes, that you're absolutely right. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And so you're back in the UK. You started playing around with stoneware. The folks from Italy have offered you some of these new stains to play with, which you're delighting in, no doubt. And then tell us a bit about your journey from there.
Well, I remember going up to visit the Crafts Council in London to ask them, how should I go about pricing my work? Because I didn't know how to do anything like that. And how should I go about pricing my work? The answer that I got, this is the official answer from the then marketing officer of the British Craft Council. So this was official. The
Yeah.
official answer I got was
Yeah.
from him was he said the price you should charge. He said the right price is the highest price you can get for it.
Great advice. I've heard that before too. Yeah.
I never forgot. Um, and I showed him some of my work that I was making then. I showed him some dishes and bowls and lasagna dishes and colors that I was using before. And he hadn't seen anything, no, because, nobody had yet then. And they were just about to select about 5 or 6 craftspeople from various disciplines, not only ceramics, to go to America, to go to um, a craft fair in Dallas, in Texas, run by the American Craft Association. And so I was one of the ones selected for that. So I went over to Dallas, and that, the best thing came from that. I mean, I did meet a few people and a few buyers and galleries and things. And one of the things that came from that was actually it really helped to get me established in Britain, in the UK, because they knew I was one of the 5 that had been especially selected for this. And so that skyrocketed my reputation here. And so I started to do very well. Yeah. Um, and then around sort of not long after that, not Marianne Heller from Germany, who has the best ceramics gallery in Europe, she was starting out then. She When she started out, she basically was just she fell in love with ceramics, and she fell in love with British ceramics, interestingly, because at that time, German ceramics was quite sort of limited and sort of terribly well behaved. And um, fell in love with British ceramics, and she came over here um, to visit a few potters and to buy some work, and she really connected with mine. And so I was exhibiting with her, and I've been exhibiting with her every 2 or 3 years for, oh, I don't know, more than 40 years. And she started off by exhibiting in her home, and then she moved to a smaller gallery, then she moved to a bigger gallery, and then, then she got established what was effectively, and still is, the best ceramics gallery in Europe. She shows all the best people. And I've been the one that she's exhibited more than anybody else, apparently. I didn't know that until quite recently. And I was very touched. We get on really well, obviously. Um, so yeah, that's been a really profitable, fruitful friendship. Um, yeah, and so because of my introduction in Japan was to pots for food and the way Japanese chefs work very closely with studio potters. That's what I started making was, I have a Japanese kick wheel. I still do. I still use it. A Japanese kick wheel, which was made in Japan at that time. Mashiko probably still can. Mashiko supported, there was enough business to support one full-time professional wheel maker. And the Japanese kick wheels are by far the best. they're quiet, they're silent. You, it's a completely different language of throwing. You use soft clay, thick slip, and you watch Japanese potters throwing, because I used to watch. There was one particular one that worked in this pottery where I did, and I would sit beside him for hours and watch him. And he would sit down in the morning, start throwing. Well, his clothes were spotless when he started. His clothes were spotless at the end of the day when he finished. And you watch British potters throwing, and they're covered in slip after about 5 minutes. They chuck water all over themselves, complete waste of materials, and noisy, cranky wheel. I mean, Japanese wheels are by far the best. And yeah, so I had a Japanese kick wheel made by the Machiko wheel maker, and I was lucky enough. I don't know how it happened, but I must have gone drinking with a friend of mine in Tokyo, who was a very glamorous English girl, and she was being chatted up by a man in this bar, and he turned out to be the captain of a ship, a freighter that was going to England. And this is just around the time that we were thinking about coming back to England. And to cut a long story short, we actually hitchhiked a lift on this freighter. That's how I came back to England, because she'd chatted up the captain. And our luggage allowance on this freighter, our luggage allowance was something like 1 ton. So of course I brought my wheel back with me,
Yeah.
so I could. That was another stroke of luck. And I still have it. Yeah. So, and that's one reason why my throwing is, because I believe that throwing is a potential vehicle for expression, just like poetry is, or singing is, or dancing, anything. Throwing is not just simply a means to be a machine and reproduce stuff over and over again. It's a vehicle for expression, and Japanese throwers knew that. And so, and this wheel definitely facilitates that. And so, my throwing is expressive, and I think it's quite distinctive. And I wanted initially, I very much wanted the because at that time in the UK, all thrown pots were very, very formal and well behaved and almost machine-like, really. And I didn't want the freedom of my glaze painting to be on lifeless pots. The pots had to have life. The pots had to have life as well. Otherwise, it seemed a bit inconsistent and incongruent. And so, my throwing is expressive, and that gives a good sort of vehicle for the glaze painting.
Can you describe what you mean by an expressive throwing process, like so that people understand it, who might be very focused on being formal and word I might use, and tight. How would you describe that?
Well, I think, I was asked to teach throwing at Falmouth Art School. This was years ago when they still had a really good ceramics course there. And the way I approached throwing was I wanted them to make, I think, something like 100 pots. They had to make them very quickly. Then they had to make the tallest pot they possibly could. And the person who made the tallest pot was the winner. The thrower who could make the tallest pot was the winner. And the interesting thing is that after they'd done all that, after they'd made these 100 pots really, really quickly, if you walked around the studio, you could tell who had made which bunch of pots. You could see their language. You could tell they were, it was like their handwriting.
Mhm.
And so that's what I mean by expressive throwing.
Mhm. Yeah, I get that. Like if I see one of your pieces and I don't see a name attached to it, I think of you immediately, right? So that's what you're talking about, that there's an identity to the piece itself.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the body of your work because you've got um, you've got lots of work across a variety of mediums, right? So could we talk a little bit about each? So I'd love to talk about your sculpture work. I do sculpture, so that appeals to me. And you're doing making massive temples a few years ago, and you've got recently some large sculptures. Um, Tell us a little bit about your sculptures and what you're trying to achieve with them, and how you might use your color in that context.
Well, I think they came, oh, that's right. How did I get started making figures? Many many years ago, the Victoria and Albert Museum was having an exhibition of Valentine's ceramics, Valentine's Day. Um, and they asked me to make something for it. And I thought, well, they don't really want me to make plates and things for a Valentine's Day exhibition, do they? I think they probably want me to make some figurative things, something like lovers. And I tried to make lovers sort of embracing. They weren't very big, just a few inches tall. But I tried, and I remember, and it just wouldn't work. I tried and tried, and it just wouldn't work. And I was getting fed up. And then I thought, okay, what do my hands want to do then? And they wanted to make some small figures. And I won't tell you too much about what the content was, because um, I've written about this I've been writing a memoir and an autobiography, and I go into this in great depth then. But basically, what the figures were doing, the figures that I met, because I said, okay, what do my hands want to do? They don't want to make romantic figures. What do they want to do then? And what they wanted to do was basically express some ancient childhood wounds that I didn't even know I had. And it made me realize that actually I needed to start having psychotherapy. So I did start having psychotherapy, and I did, and I kept making figures just for myself, for several years, and it was a way of sort of I do that. I wouldn't do it all the time, but just every so often I would make figures, and they would be sort of expressing aspects of my life and me, and then one day somebody, a collector, a significant British collector, came into the studio, and he saw a couple of very small, very small pots, actually, very small pots. And he asked me if I could make them 2 meters tall, 6 feet tall. And I said, all right, okay, I'll have a go. I'd never done anything that size before, but I thought, okay, I'll have a go. So I had to work out how to do it, and so I did. I worked out how to do it and took them over. He was very pleased with them, had it installed in his garden. They were just simple tall forms, actually, not figurative at this stage. They were just simple tall forms. But then I started making the figures much larger, and they ended up in sculpture parts as well. And um, so it happened sort of gradually. And then when I moved to the studio that I'm in now, which we got the studio building in the year 2000, so I've been there since then. Um, it's a big studio building, and it was big enough, so we had to make a kiln. So we built a kiln that was large enough because it had natural gas pipes into the building. It had been a sort of factory before. And so I made a kiln. So my gas kiln, I have a large gas kiln, which we basically built ourselves, which is 2 meters tall, more than 2 meters tall inside, so that I could fire large pieces of coal. Uh, and moving into that studio meant, because before that I'd had my studio effectively in the house where I now live, and so I was limited. I couldn't make very big things very easily. I had to sort of, it was quite a challenge. I mean, I did make these pieces for this collector in this house here, but it was a real challenge just to sort of manage the technology of making them and firing them, and they had to be joined together because they were too big to go in the kiln. So I had to work out means of joining. But then when I moved to the studio where I am now and built this new gas kiln, I could make things that were, tall, larger than my life size. That's what I wanted. Large life size, bit larger than life size. I could make them whole in one piece. And so that started a whole other body of work.
Yeah, very interesting. And you've got your work across the UK in parks and in art organizations. It's beautiful. And the work that you do in those large sculptures, the surface design, I guess, is what I'm thinking of, is very similar to the surface design that you might use with some functional ware that you make, plates and so on. It's got a sort of freedom is the word I keep coming back to when I think of your work with with the color and the application of it.
Yeah, 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 that's right. Yes, I feel just as free on the large pieces. Yeah, exactly. I can play about. I mean, the one thing that I've taught myself is that, um, one thing that was really important to help me to be free was I was a significant evening in the studio many, 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 many years ago when I was starting out. I had painted a plate that I really liked. It was very free, a dinner plate, very free, and I really liked it. So I thought, I'll do some more. I'll do some more. I had a whole pile of blank plates that I'd made waiting to be painted. And so I was, to do some like the first one. And the more I tried, the more it didn't work. It just wouldn't work. I couldn't do it. And it took me ages. And then I realized eventually that actually, when I made the first one, I wasn't copying anything. It just came. I just did it. And so I realized that's what makes it work. That's what makes it work. The fact that I just did it. I wasn't copying anything. I had nothing in my mind. I just did it. And so that is what I do. So I just do it. I just do it. So, even with the big sculptures, and even when I've had a commission, I had a lovely commission from my some wonderful clients of mine who wanted me to make a massive, great clay. We made huge clay tiles to make a big, long mural that would go outside on the wall beside their swimming pool. They've got a big outdoor garden and a big swimming pool, and they wanted a big sort of clay mural to go along there. And they also wanted they wanted the mural to be made of large tiles that would be quite thick, like in almost 2 inches in thickness. It was so that they could sit on screws on the wall. They didn't want to have to grout them in or do anything like that. So they could just sit on screws on the wall. And I thought it was a really good idea. I'm so glad they suggested that. So we spent ages. And so, when you make tiles that thick, they had lots of technical problems. I mean, they're about 2 feet square. They're quite big. I had loads of technical problems. They're all cracking to start with. It took us months to make enough tiles for this wall. And, by the end, we had worked out how to do it. We had worked out how to make them and let them dry slowly and turn them frequently. And then when it came to painting them, okay, what am I going to do? And I realized that actually the way to paint it is to paint it as if it was one of those, just do it. Don't plan it. Don't think about it. And so what I did was, um, I knew on the Monday, for example, I knew I was going to do the painting the next Monday. And I had laid out, so during the week, I laid out all the tiles on the I had to put big tables up, extra long tables up in the studio, put all the tiles down on the table. And then I basically withdrew from society. During that week, I didn't speak to anybody. I didn't socialize. I was basically going into myself and recharging my own battery so that when I came into the studio on the Monday to start the painting, not knowing what I was going to do, deliberately not knowing, I had no plan in mind at all. And if it hadn't worked, I would have had to spend another few months making all the tiles again. Um, but I had to let go of all of that. I just had to let go of all of that And I did, and I just let go of it, and I did all the painting. I finished it in a few hours. It didn't take me all that long. I fired it, and it looked absolutely wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting about how you use your what you described as what my hands want to do, but this freedom of your spirit and to consciously um, allow it to come out of you without a lot of preconceived notions about what the end product might look like.
Yes. So that's the thing to do, is to have no preconceived. So I'm going into it in a spirit of curiosity. What will my hands do? So I'm watching it just as if you would be watching me doing it. I'm in that same state of, I don't know what's going to happen next. What are my hands going to do? So it's about having an empty mind and allowing my hands to lead, and also allowing, accept, giving myself permission to fail. And even although we'd spent months making these tiles, I still had to say, it's okay if it doesn't work, I'll just make some more. I still had to do that. I still had to do that. Well, it wasn't necessary, but I still had to do that just to help, help let go and help, not it's becoming deeply relaxed, really.
I've done a fair bit of meditation in my life, and so in thinking about Buddhist meditation and the mindset associated with that, in many ways, what you're describing is that state of kind of emptiness in some way that we get to that allows that mind to come through. Have you done some meditation to find you there?
Well, I haven't done, when I'm in that state, it's a state of meditation, definitely, yes. And I've noticed that when I'm demonstrating, because I was invited to America a few years ago, to NCECA, to when they had their conference in Pittsburgh, and I was the demonstrator there. And I made something in clay. I sort of doodled about, made this big sculpture in clay, a big clay doodle, lovely form. And then I painted, and I've noticed that when I'm working like that, the audience is absolutely, you know, it's like I'm in a state of meditation, and they seem to pick that up as well. Um, so yes, yeah, it is a state of meditation. Yeah. Hmm.
So, I've got a technical question for you. We're talking about freedom here, and now I want to switch it to kind of a technical thing. Um, when you are approaching finishing your work, whatever it might be, whether it's a functional bowl or a piece of sculpture, do you think about your color palette? Do you lay out your glazes in front of you? I'm imagining what it might be like in your studio. Do you lay these glazes out and then you begin to work so that you've got some preconceived idea about the colors that you might apply? Or do you have all of your colors in front of you and you just say, well, I'm going to dip my brush into whatever comes to mind?
Yeah, I have all of the colors out. I'm quite ritual in how I lay them out. I think I've got about 10 buckets of different colored glazes, and I lay them in a semicircle on the table in front of me. And they're always in the same order, so I don't get in a muddle about what's where. And um, and then I don't know what I'm going to do. I just watch my hands after that. My hands pick up a brush, and which bucket do they go for? Oh, it's gone for the orangey one. I didn't think it was going to do that. Da-da-dum. And then what's it going to do? Well, it's going to go chunk, chunk, chunk. And I'm watching what it's going to do.
Ah,
Um,
yeah, okay.
yeah.
That's very interesting. I'm going to try that when I get down to the studio after our conversation here today, because I really relate to that in terms of what you're talking about, but I don't think that I've consciously tried to be as free as what you're talking about. Although I know in my case, I always struggled, although I'm better now, but I struggled with wanting to do it right. And of course, in in the clay world, there's a piece of doing it right because you don't want your things to blow up in the kiln. So there's that base of doing it right. But I think I've over time got rid of the notion of trying to do it right. And I think about your courses that you run on creativity. And now that I understand your process better after our conversation here today, it makes perfect sense why you're running courses on creativity, not throwing or I don't know, surface design or something else, right? It makes, but can you tell us a little bit about how you approach these notions of creativity?
Well, I mean, yes, about your wanting to make things right, the sort of dealing with the technical rightness of anything. Yes, I don't want anything to blow up in the kiln. So, in the making process, I trust my experience and I trust my technical knowledge that actually that I will, that will be okay. I trust my experience and knowledge, so I don't need to hold on to that, you know, and the creative rightness. Well, you can let go of that because if you let go of that and you just do it, it's going to be right anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
good, good. I'm glad. I'm glad. Um, um, so yes. And what did you ask me after that?
Well, I was thinking there was a natural inclination then for you to teach creativity, which in a way is about being free, I guess. I keep coming back to that word, but that being creative is allowing the ideas to flow and merge and play in your mind. So it makes sense that you would teach that. Tell us a little bit about that.
well, one of the things I did many, 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 many years ago when um, I was just for a social evening. I would join in with some friends who were doing life drawing in charcoal, and we would do things like, draw with your left hand, draw with your right hand, do a drawing in 1 minute. And we do all these things, and you'd get some lovely sort of fresh drawings that way. And so, I took that approach to the clay. So, for example, the first project that, if if you or anybody comes on a creativity course, then the first thing we do is I give you some clay, 30 minutes, do something. Don't plan, don't decide, don't be in control, do something. And that's in a way the easy bit. The difficult bit sometimes, not for everybody, but for some people, the difficulty bit is the second stage, which is accept it,
Yes, yes.
because it's not going to be like what you expected. It might be something quite different.
Hmm.
So
That's to get rid of in many ways that sort of judging mind
yes,
that really inhibits us and inhibits the creative process.
absolutely it does. Yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah, exactly. So it's accept it and I've often said, if I were going to write a book on creativity, because I've written my memoir, but if I was going to write a book on how to be creative, it would have about 3 pages, or it might have 4 pages. Then it would have a huge chunk at the end. The first page would be gather some materials. Second page would be empty your mind. Third page would say do something. And the fourth page would say accept it. And then have to be a whole load of extra pages after that dealing with why people have such difficulty accepting it and how to accept it.
It's true. I was a psychologist in my working life, and
Oh,
so I think clay, maybe art in general. I mean, I focus on clay, but it seems to me that clay offers us a great opportunity to find out about ourselves because we are constantly being I don't know what word I want to say, touched by negative thoughts and judgment and so on that we do ourselves while we're down in the studio, and how we deal with that and how we can rid ourselves of that to be that open, relaxed person in the with our art.
Absolutely, absolutely, it does. It teaches, and that's what I find happens on the courses that I run is people learn about themselves. They discover things about themselves that they didn't know, and they discover their own language. They discover their own voice. What is it that they want to? Why do they want to work in clay? Why do they want to make things? They'll discover what they need to express, what they're doing it for, what needs to come out, and it's very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. I think if you have the right teacher, it's very powerful. Sometimes the teachers themselves can get focused on technical things that we've talked about, right?
absolutely.
And I
Yes, there's
think lots of times young potters want to learn the technical stuff that so that they can make it right, you know? So
yeah,
there's that balance of needing to know the technical side to make it right, but then allowing yourself to be free.
yeah. And it's important to allow yourself to be free first,
Mm.
and work out the technicality. I mean, you know, when I made that, when I was making these tall figures, I made the figures small first, and then I would work out how to make them bigger. So I'd be free, very free initially, and then the technology sort of follows.
Yeah. Sandy, thank you so much for being with us here today. This has been a delightful conversation, and it would be fun to hang out with you and learn more with you and over dinner and coffee and pots. So I really appreciate this conversation.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it enormously as well, and yeah, and great to see your work too. I mean, you're doing some really interesting things,
Yeah,
aren't you?
it's been fun. I sort of think of it as my journey, right? And so it is it's been fun. I'm somebody said, "Are you retired, Bob?" I said, "Oh no, I'm a potter. I'm down in the studio all the time, right?" So I know
So
it's
that's good for you. That's
that's great.
great.
Yeah.
It's been a great pleasure, Bob. Lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to the Color and Ceramics Podcast with Bob Acton and his guests. Please help others find the podcast by subscribing to this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, such as iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or other podcatchers. And don't forget to give us a review. We'll see you next time.